Welcome to another episode of Lights Ambition Podcast. Today we are joined by a musical wizard. She's giving insight on music and how it is shaped by culture, social constructs, and location. She also talks about her path to becoming a rabbi. If you like the episode, please give the podcast a like or a 5-star rating depending on what platform you are listening to. Without further ado, Rabbi Doris Dyen.
How's it going, Doris?
It's going just fine today, thank you.
That's great to hear. When my grandpa first introduced me to you through email, I was really excited about the opportunity to get to know you. And I know that you have an editing background, but that was much later on in your life. I was wondering, bring me back to the start. How did you kind of find your way into that career path, and what kind of advice could you give others?
It's a long road, and I won't. We probably won't make as many stops on it as there actually were. Well, first of all, it's important to know that I was born in 1945. The reason that's important is because it was right near the end of World War II, and I was born into a Jewish family. But my dad was a comparative linguist, which means that he did a lot of work with languages, specifically in his case of the Pacific Islands, what's called the Austronesian language family. And he did field work there, and that was his life. He was a professor of linguistics at Yale University. And my mom was a teacher, a social studies teacher. But before that, she was a secretary, and she was the person who encouraged me to learn how to type. And I had to go to business school for a summer to learn how to do that. Today we would say keyboard, but it was typing. I'm telling you this because using words and working with words and grammar and language was like in the DNA of our home. Also working with people or being with people who were not like us necessarily, because my dad's field made him take part in lots of activities that didn't involve people from, say, Western Europe or the US, but instead from the Philippines, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from other islands in the Pacific, which meant that we were always having people from all kinds of different backgrounds in our home, eating with us, talking with us, singing with us. I've loved music ever since before I can remember. And I used to learn songs. I learned songs from my grandmother. I learned songs in Russian and in Hebrew and in Yiddish. And a couple in Ukrainian, probably.
So are you fluent in all of those languages?
Not that I can speak in those languages, but I learned them phonetically. And I learned how to write down music because I took piano lessons. And I thought I invented this. Only much later did I find out that other people have done this for years. But as far as I was concerned, I invented it when I was, say, 10 or 11. And I would ask her what the words meant, and I would write down phonetically how to say them, going right along with the musical notation on paper. And this is all, again, to say that using words and using language to work with was absolutely built into my life. So when you ask, how did I get to the point of working with words in other ways as an adult? In some ways, I didn't have a choice. It just was, it was there, and I just followed those paths. But I also have to say that my original intention was not to be a writer. I mean, I would write poetry every so often. I would do things that involved writing, but that wasn't because some people are born, sort of grow up knowing that they want to, say, write fiction, or that they want to be a journalist, or, things like that. And I wasn't like that. I wanted to be in music. That's what I really liked most.
Why is that? Did you find that music portrays a better story than maybe what you could
No,
What you,
it's just I loved it. It was simply that. In fact, I remember my parents they didn't have very many records. We're talking 78s here. Just to tell, for context for your listeners. They had a few albums, and I like this. I'm 3 years old or 4 years old at this time that I'm talking about. And one of them was folk songs from South African Veld, it was called, when it was still a Dutch colony. One of them was Peter and the Wolf, which I don't know, you may have encountered Peter and the Wolf, but it's really a piece for kids, but it's telling a story through music. It's by a Russian composer. Another one of these albums was J.S. Bach's Suite Number 2 in B minor for a flute. Okay, and so in order to keep me occupied while she was trying to clean the house or the apartment, it was at that time, she would put them on the record player one after another. And she would, I loved the songs from South Africa, and I would learn to sing along with them, and I loved listening to Peter and the Wolf, and all these different instruments and pretending to be different animals. That's what happens in that piece. And then I would say, now I want to hear the beautiful music, by which I meant the Bach suite, flute suite, and I would just sit there, and it was partly because I have decided over these many years that I think what I have is a very low level of what they call synesthesia. S-Y-N, synesthesia. SYNESTHESIA. What it means is the ability to have your senses kind of overlap. And what I mean by that is that in my case, when I would hear certain sounds, I could see colors. Because as a kid, I didn't think anything of it because I thought, well, what do you think as a child? That it's simply what it is. But I realized I was seeing for certain, not every piece, not every kind of music, but certain ones, I was actually seeing like colors going along, dark colors or light colors. And it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And so when I said play the beautiful music, it was because not only were the sounds beautiful, but I like watching it.
Well, have you ever seen the movie Soul at all?
Yes.
So what the musician or the pianist experiences there, is that what you're talking about as well, where he kind of like transports himself maybe not transporting himself into a different state, but he's seeing the colors, he's visualizing what he's hearing.
Right. It didn't feel like transporting. It just felt like that you were using two sets of senses at the same time.
Gotcha.
I was using my eyes in a way and listening. It was coming through my ears, but it was manifesting both as sound waves and as I guess I don't know. I mean, it's like I don't know. It's like it must be scientifically, it must be a matter of like different sets of nerves working in different ways with each other.
Yeah. And
anyway,
so
that's pretty crazy.
I was about to say, like, I know we'll get to more later on with what you worked with as an editor, but do you ever miss the fact that you weren't able to pursue music because the editorial piece and the other surrounding writing pieces, like you said, you just got engulfed into it?
You mean, do you mean
not pursuing a music aspect?
A musical career, complete musical career as a performer? Or no, I didn't, because I actually took piano lessons for quite a long time, and I was in a couple of recitals. I also played cello for a few years in middle school.
Awesome.
And so I had the, and I also later, when I went into not college, but graduate school, I actually took voice lessons. So I've always done a certain amount of performing, but what I went into in music was music theory and music history,
Yep.
especially music history. And so I did actually have a career in music. It wasn't in performance, even though
Sorry, yes, I should say
I
performing.
continued performing for myself and, with other people, but not, as a full-time career, like a concert pianist or something like that.
Gotcha. Well, now talk to me a little about that. So you studied music history throughout
Mhm.
college, and you said theory as well.
Yes.
What does
So,
that entail?
so music theory. Music theory is about how the sounds are being put together and how to talk about those sounds and how to talk about what the structure of the music is. Okay, so it's obviously when somebody is putting is creating a piece of music, they're hearing something in their heads. They write it down on a piece of paper, or nowadays they don't write it down on paper. They'll put it right into a digitized source of some kind. But the idea is that they'll try to make it playable by other people.
Hmm.
So it can either be that someone actually listens to this what they've done, or that they can read the notation and reproduce it in that way. But then the question is, so how is it that you hear? How is it that you know what's going on in music? And even
Mhm.
though we often say that music is a universal language, it's not. It's that human beings all have the capacity for music, and it's a very, very old. I mean, it goes back to what makes us human:
Yeah.
the ability to use our voices to produce different pitches, finding ways of using objects to make sounds with.
Yeah.
So, a tree trunk can become a drum,
Mhm.
or a shell can become a flute because you can drill a hole in it and then blow through it, and then you get a sound.
Mhm.
So, what music theory is trying to do is to and analyze the structure of how these different sounds are put together, why it works the way it does, what does repetition tell you about a song, like for example, what makes a song able to be sung by a lot of people at the same time. One of the things is if certain phrases repeat, because it's easier to remember that way.
Yeah.
So, and another way, say, talking very on simple terms, if you have a melody like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, well, the same melody can be used for other words. So you can say, Ba, ba, black sheep, have you any wool? Same
Huh.
melody. Um,
Very interesting.
yeah. And that melody is originally a French tune that got sort of incorporated into, English language places, and then other words were put to it. But what makes that song really singable is, here's a melody. Bum 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 bum. It went up from one note to a note about 5 notes up from it, and then came back down the scale. So a
Hmm.
scale, it's in that particular melody, a scale is like the organizing principle of the
Yeah.
melody. Ba 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 bum. And then the middle part of it, bum 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 bum, repetition. Bum 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 bum.
Hmm.
Bum 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 bum. The first part and the last part are the same. There's a part in the middle that's it's related, but it's slightly different use of the same tones. And then back to the sense. So what you have is, like, if you were going to graph it out, you'd say A, B, A.
Hmm.
That's the structure of that little tune.
So is that what a lot of like artists might use to have more of a catchy tune? Is maybe like you said, either repeat the chorus. Like a lot of songs will have the chorus in there maybe 3 to 4 times into a song. But I never realized that the melody would play such a big part in the catchiness of a song. And the more I'm thinking about it, so the band I listen to, Imagine Dragons, their melody might shift a little bit when they go from chorus into a verse, but it's relatable, like you said. So it keeps you with it. So I'm going to keep that in mind now when I start listening to more people,
Start listening.
because that does play, I'm sure, a really big factor in the catchiness. And for you, was that probably one of the coolest things that you were learning when you were studying music theory?
Yes, when I was studying it, it's giving you the tools to hear, listen. You know, we all have ears. I mean, we can,
Hmm.
like most people are deaf. Everybody can hear stuff going on, but how to make sense of it, how to make some kind of meaning out of it for yourself,
Yeah.
and just because you and I both know that tune that I just sang very
Hmm.
well, learned it before we could walk, probably.
Hmm.
If you played that tune, say for someone in a culture far removed from ours, like maybe somebody in a tribe in the Amazon that don't have cell phones, because anybody that has cell phones is like connected to the whole world. But there are a few people out there in our planet that don't have these devices, and you might do that for them, and they would say, what did you just, that wouldn't have any context for them.
Yeah.
And what I mean by context is musical context. It wouldn't necessarily make sense to them. It would sound totally foreign. And if you try listening, say, to music from, say, Indian music from India that are called raga, it's RAGA.
Yeah.
You listen to that music and you might find yourself thinking things like, this is all the same, and it just goes on and on. And there's,
Hmm.
and it's because you don't have the cultural context of having learned that music early on in your life and having been essentially taught by the people around you what the structure is,
Hmm.
how to make sense of those sounds. And
So
so
my
people
buddy,
study. Yeah.
yeah, my buddy loves raga. And literally the entire premise of one of his favorite songs, it was literally one step forward, 2 steps back. And then he sings like a little thing, and then it just goes right back to it for 4 to 5 minutes.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, it's a catchy song, but I was like, that's just so interesting to think about that these different cultures. Was there a specific, I guess, group of people or even like music group or ideology that you studied a lot? I know you did African American music style.
Mhm.
And what brought you, I guess, to that, I guess, portion of the music world?
Okay. So propel yourselves forward in time to um, graduate school. I joined various singing groups, musical groups, when I was in both in college and in grad school. And in grad school, there was a group that was started. This was at the University of Illinois. I got there, I guess, in 1969. So it was like 69, early 70s. I'm talking about. And there was a musical group that formed there for singing called to sing what was called sacred harp music. Now, it's sacred music, but harp has nothing to do with an instrument. In fact, this music is a cappella, which means no instruments. It was simply the name of a book, a book of a songbook, a type of songbook.
Mhm.
And this uh, this book, the 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 notation in this book is written in not just round notes like we're used to seeing, but the notes have different shapes. And the reason they have different shapes is to help the people who are singing sing the different intervals between the notes accurately, even if they may not have very much musical education. So you'd have one triangle shape that would be, and we have to assume that the scale is what you may have learned in school, like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So this type of music, there's some forms of this that use all seven shapes, which get you do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. The one that I'm talking about uses four shapes because they do fa, sol, la, mi, fa. So each of those syllables that I just said has a shape associated with it on the page. Okay, so you've got a triangle is in that system is called fa, and it's also four notes up from it. It's also fa. So fa, sol, la, fa, 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 like that. And then a round note is so. So it's triangle, circle, and then square for the next note up. Fa, sol, la is the square. Fa, back to a triangle. Sol, la. And then the last note before you get back to fa again is mi, fa. And that kind of music made with that on that type of leads you to not use all the notes that we're used to hearing in other kinds of music. But it became very popular through much of the 19th century into the 20th century in places in the rural South and in the uplands of the South, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. White and Black people were learning songs from books that were printed this way. And people and musicians were writing songs using this scale system. This musical group at the University of Illinois was formed to sing some of these songs together, learn how to sing using this notation style on the page, and also learning the songs that were in the book, and they are in harmony. So it's like 3-part harmony, 4-part harmony. So we all were essentially, it was a music, it was a singing group. So it was a choir, but we were focusing on music in this particular style. In the Deep South during the 19th century, both white people and Black people sang from these books. But because life was segregated, and in many cases still is segregated in some of those areas, just in terms of daily life, the style that the Black people were singing the same songs in was different from the style that the white people sang in. And that got me interested because I was in ethnomusicology. That's what I was majoring in. Yeah.
Why was it different?
So some of the differences were stylistic in terms of performance, because the actual notes were not different, but how you sang them and what the music meant to the community and how different, which songs were emphasized. That was what was different. So, and I was interested in how music works in society, not just, as the music, but the music as music, and then the music as a part of a culture.
Yeah.
So, for example, when a Black person would perform, say, one of these songs, most of them were like this. They would have people would this. Okay, go back to another. There's a square that has to happen before the square that I was about to be on.
All good. All good.
So you'd have people would actually sing in a square formation, a hollow square. So you'd have like all the bass singers would sing sitting on one side. All of the alto singers would sit next to them, but on a different side of the square. All of the tenor singers would sit in a different side of the square, and all of the soprano singers. So, and then the person leading was standing in the middle. Whoever was leading the song would stand in the middle. For the white singers, the person would just stand pretty straight usually and just lead the song. And much of the time when black singers sang this same music, they would kind of march around. And it was in that community they called it walking your time. So that you're standing in the center, you get the song started, and then you start almost dancing, because that's different parts, to emphasize different parts. They would walk over to that part or walk over to that part. And some people had their own style of walking.
Yeah. So be telling a story with
while they're kind of like telling the story through what they were doing, and sort of bringing out whatever they felt was important in the music. And people took turns leading, so they didn't have like one conductor. People would sign up to lead a song, and then they'd be called on. Okay, Mr. Jones, it's your turn, and he'd get up and whatever. Anyway, so this is a long description to say that when I got interested in how this Black community in southeastern Alabama had gotten interested or came to know this kind of music in the first place, and how their way of doing it was different from the white singers in the same region, the same towns, because they didn't sing with each other usually. The types of songs that were preferred by the Black singers were different from the types of songs in the same book. There's lots of songs in this book. It's like thick, preferred by the white singers. And then there were certain other things too, like vocal style was different. The white singers would usually use kind of a nasal, sort of piercing, like ba, so, like that, like a piercing kind of sound. The Black singers were more likely to use kind of like a more open sound. And again, that made the music sound different. Even though it's the same notes and the same words. Anyway, that's why I got all excited talking to you about this, but because it was really exciting to me to see, to hear those differences. And then I got, of course, involved in the cultural differences of white and Black culture in those areas, because that was a part of it too, getting to know why people, how people taught each other to sing, how people learn this music, from one generation to the next. So I found that it was partly oral tradition and partly written tradition that was going on. So I'm throwing a whole lot of words. You asked me what music theory was. The words that I've been using are part of music theory,
which I think is so cool.
Written tradition,
vocal I think style, that's so cool.
All those kinds of things. That's all part of what music theory is all about.
So for me, I will say I do not know much about music. So hearing about music theory and music history and learning about how cultures and language and even just geographic location and what's happening at the time all play a factor into how people sing. They literally said like people of color will have different ways about singing than white people. So it's just crazy to see how it all plays out. And I'd love to fast forward a little bit, because you had this experience in your graduate school, then you got your PhD, and then you had the opportunity to go to London and write. What was happening there? What opportunity did you get there?
What led us, and the us is me and my husband, whom I met in music school at the University of Illinois. And he helped me actually on the field with the field work. I was there in Alabama by myself for most of the time, but he would come down and, we'd go to singing events together, and he would help with recording, because I was recording everything on cassettes. Remember cassettes?
Yep. That's awesome.
Yes, some of which are still playable.
Oh, there we go.
Really. But during that time, we were invited by Grove's Dictionary of Music, which it was actually Macmillan, the publishing company, was putting together a new edition of this very large, really an encyclopedia of music that was called Grove's Dictionary of Music, because originally it was one volume back in 1880, whatever, but then it had grown to be, multiple volumes because they were writing about more things. Anyway, they were recruiting grad students to come over to London to primarily to help edit articles being written by other people about all kinds of subjects to do with music. It could be history and theory were the sort of the basis of it, but just a myriad of topics, and not just about the sort of abstraction, the abstract discussion of music, but also individual performers, individual composers, groups that were important, different specific styles of music. Every instrument had its own article being written about it. Folk music, classical music. In other words, it's the English language encyclopedia of music.
Yeah.
And human life. And so we were invited to come to work as editors for them for this project to do a new edition of this encyclopedia, which I think at that time it had been probably 20 or 25 years or more since there had been a new edition. And so there was, of course, lots and lots of more things had been written about, and a lot more research had been done. You'd think that Johann Sebastian Bach would be, everything that could possibly be known had already been written about him, but that's not true, because new pieces would have been discovered, and new connections between the different parts of the Bach family, which was a large family. So it's like that's the way music history is. I mean, more and more, the more that gets written, the more that needs to be thought about, because it's opened up new avenues of research and possible connections between people and styles and things. So that's what we were asked to do. And I was asked to be part of the ethnomusicology department, which everything was color coded in that office, and all of our articles were gray. It's like other articles were in the sort of data lists of who was writing what about which topic. All of the ones that had to do with non-Western music were gray, and other green might, German might be green, or I don't know. But anyway, I just always felt that we should have had a better looking color than gray. Okay. I wrote a few of the articles, very short ones. Usually the articles that I wrote were like one paragraph articles about a specific performer or a specific small subject that nobody had written about anything. So I just, got some stuff together and made it so that particular thing would be in the dictionary, would be in the publication. Mm-hmm. But my job primarily was to edit other people's work. So, and many times these were articles written by people for whom English was not their first language. Remember, we're talking about ethnomusicology here.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of what I had to do was figure out what it was they were trying to say and reframe the sentences so that it actually was readable in English. So you get an article that was written in English by somebody whose first language was French or Chinese or something else. And so you're reading this article and you're not sure what's this person trying to say, because the sentences don't, the words that were being used weren't words that we would normally use in English to say that thing, whatever it is. So the editor's job was to make the author look good.
Oh.
And make sure that what was written actually made good sense in English and got the point across that the person was trying to do. So, and there were some very funny, people would write things that they thought were exactly the way to say something, but because their language wasn't English, things would come out. It wouldn't be something that made sense.
Yeah, it'd be a little wonky. It'd be a little wonky.
And you'd have to find like a synonym. You saw what they were trying for, and then you have to help find the word that actually means that in English itself. And that was what my job primarily was.
How long were you there for?
So we were there for, I think it was 2 full years.
Yeah.
So we went in 1974. We were there all of 1975 and then part of 1976. So it was basically a 2-year experience living in London.
And then you came back to the States, right?
We came back to the States because we still. Oh, I should. I didn't mention that during that time I was also trying to edit my own dissertation, write and edit.
Oh.
So, in addition to many hours a week with the Grove office, and my husband Dean was also doing that. We were living in a 2-room apartment or flat, shall we say, in London, a flat. And it had a living room, bedroom, and a kitchen dining room. That was it. And we had a wooden trestle table in the kitchen dining room. And that was where we ate, and we also both wrote our dissertations. So
nice.
He had one side, I had the other side of the table. We each had a typewriter. So that was the other part of writing that I was doing. That was writing that I had to be doing.
Yeah.
Right? So I was editing for, say 40 hours a week at the Grove office, and then writing and trying to edit my own dissertation, which was on this black shape note singing that I had been studying in southern Alabama.
Yeah.
So
I know dissertations are not easy.
No.
There's a few people I know that are going to pursue a PhD, and holy cow. Yeah, I can only imagine.
400 pages.
400 pages?
Yes.
Holy cow.
Yes.
Everything after that was slight.
I wouldn't say that it was deathless. It was not deathless prose, shall we say. It was just very utilitarian, get the point across.
Yeah, and then, so you came back after a few years. Is this when you went to Pennsylvania to start working for the Rivers of Steel National Heritage Area, when you helped kind of create that, or?
No, when we came back to Illinois, we had to finish our We had to
The
defend
dissertation.
our dissertations and defend them. And then the first, it wasn't quite tossing a coin, but what we decided, my husband Dean and I, Dean Root is his name, Professor Dean Root, but he wasn't a professor at that time. We decided whoever got a job first, that's where we would go. Because I should tell you that unlike fields like nursing or, sales, it's not easy to find work in American music history, which is what Dean's field was, or ethnomusicology, certainly not in the academic world. There just aren't very many positions.
Yeah.
We had to, hope that we would be able to find a job. So the first job that came up was working for me, and that's where we went, was to Florida and I worked for what was called the Florida Folk Life program. It was part of the Florida Department of State. And the advertisement was for a historian. And I remember answering the ad by saying, well, I'm not really a historian. My field is ethnomusicology, but I can do all the things you are asking me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, whatever they all were. I just went through the list. And I should tell you, this might be helpful actually to the listeners, because one of the things that you had said that you would be interested in is advice that I might give to people for certain types of careers. And the piece of advice I have to give to people is to not underestimate yourself in terms of the life experiences you've had. Because the way I found this job in Florida was actually through and I don't get a commission on this, a book called What Color is Your Parachute? And it was a particularly written, and it's been through like a zillion editions. And I'm sure there's a current one now. But the point is to help people figure out what kind of career path to follow based on what their previous experience has been, what things they enjoyed doing in different jobs, what things they really hated doing about jobs that they've had in the past, and to then put a plan together for how to find the position that works best for you and for which, in a way, you are the only applicant. It's weird, but this approach is, instead of sending like 15 or 20 different applications for different jobs, hoping that something sticks, and that somebody replies and asks you to come in for an interview, this approach turns it on its head and has the job seeker start doing network interviewing themselves based on what they know about themselves, because what they're looking for is how am I going to fit in society? Where are there people who are doing the kinds of things I want to be doing, and then go talk to those people. And it's a very different approach to life, but that's like my one piece of help, because it was absolutely life-changing for me to look at it that way. And each job that I have had since graduating, since getting my degree and being out in the work world, has been as a result of that approach.
I think that's awesome. And so you were in Florida, you got your position there, and your husband followed with you.
Yep, he followed with me. And
how did that
girl at that time too?
Yeah, how did that lead to the Rivers of Steel National Heritage Area?
Well, my job in Florida was to interview people I was hired to be a folklorist, a folk life specialist. And so my job was to do oral histories with people all over the state, different nationality groups, different ethnic groups, different religious groups, and essentially to document their traditions. And also then we did public programs in libraries and festivals and things all over the state as educational opportunities for people to learn more about each other. We were there I was there for 3 years. Dean, I think, was there for 2. And then he was offered a job also because of using this what color is your parachute sort of approach, because we were like a support group for each other.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Up in Pittsburgh with the University of Pittsburgh to join the faculty, to help create a Center for American Music. That's how we got here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I moved then with him because that was our agreement. He had moved with me to Florida, so I moved with him up here to Pittsburgh. And I thought, well, okay, now what am I going to do? Because I left the job that I had, in a sense, created in Florida. And I went through the same process of, okay, what I want to be able to do some of the things I was doing in Florida up here, but there's no position to do that. So I got in touch with, there was a state heritage affairs commission at that time. I got in touch with the head of that. And the first thing we did was write a grant for me to document folk traditions in Southwest Pennsylvania, which is where Pittsburgh is. And so I did a project to go around and do very much the same kind of thing I'd been doing in Florida, to document traditional cultures and in this area, most of which, of course, had to do with the steel industry. So during that time, a separate project was started to try to save some of the big, structures, buildings from the steel industry, because when we arrived, the steel industry was really falling apart in Pittsburgh because of it was just changing a lot. Pittsburgh had been known for its steel industry for 100 years.
Yeah.
And the culture, the economy of the whole country was changing, and steel making was becoming more and more automated. So you didn't need, thousands and thousands of people to be working in that in those factories and allied factories making the parts and all kinds of things. So there was a push to try to save, at least for historic preservation, to save some of the buildings associated and the types of how steel was made and what went into it, because the whole region's economy was changing so quickly. It was an effort to try to preserve some of that history. And so I was delegated by the Heritage Affairs Commission of the state, because I was still doing these other projects, as to sit on the committee that was planning this historic preservation effort.
Awesome.
Because they said, well, what about the people who worked in the industries? Different ethnic groups, Italians and Greeks and other people who had come to work in steel or in allied industries, coal and coke production. And so as that project grew, it finally got to the point where it was large enough to, they got enough funding together to really start doing the work of preservation. I sort of transferred over, and I created another job and they asked me what I wanted to be called. And I said, well, how about director? I've never been director of anything. A director of what? Cultural conservation. Because they were talking about historic building preservation. And I said, you need to have both. You need to have conserving the cultures of the people who have been a part of the steel industry, right along with the buildings. So I started, that's how I got over to what became Rivers of Steel. It started out being called Steel Industry Heritage Project, I think, first, and then Steel Industry Heritage Corporation. It finally sort of incorporated as a nonprofit. And then when a management plan was finally in place, that everybody decided, well, it wasn't just about steel. So that's how the name Rivers of Steel was more sort of evocative as a name. It wasn't just, it didn't sound like just another corporation. So Steel Industry Heritage is what it became. And then I was with that organization for, well, from 1990 to 2007 or 2008, somewhere in there is when I left there. So that was, a pretty long, about 18 years, working with, documenting the traditions of all these different ethnic groups, putting things together as public programs. But the mission was to help create new economic opportunities for some of these communities, which had been formed because they were, say, near a coal seam, and like a mining town would be formed. But then when that coal seam was used up, what happens to the town? Well, then people start having to move around, and then the cultural cohesiveness would start to fray. And so the idea of at least preserving the oral history of those places and the traditions that people brought with them, that was what I did.
And what would you say was probably the most rewarding part for you in working through all of this? Was it the conservation piece, or was it more getting to talk to, I guess, members of a community that have been around for a very long time and share their story?
So that's a good question, because I think both were important to me. The idea of conserving them so that they wouldn't be forgotten. The practices, the religious rituals, the songs. There were a lot of songs, actually. Protest songs and songs about work and about working life that people wrote, and whatever language they were using in their homes. But also, for me, I would say the most rewarding thing, like as a human being, was to be able to hear people's stories and get them to talk one-on-one with me about what was important to them.
Yeah.
And what was wonderful was that for many people, it was the first time anybody ever asked them
Really
those kinds of questions. That
was crazy to think about.
That took enough interest to ask them. So, what was it like being working in a coal mine, or working in the coke ovens, processing coal into fuel for the steel industry? And people would tell me, talk about things that accidents that they had seen, or how proud they were when they were able to do certain skills of that particular occupation really well, and also raising families and how it was difficult, or maybe it wasn't so difficult, or what kinds of support they had doing all those things. So yeah,
I think that's absolutely amazing, because anytime I get to hear about, so I'm an environmentalist, and we had a air quality class where we would talk about different communities that have been around for centuries, and they lived there, their grandparents, their great grandparents, so on and so forth. They all talk about the richness of an area. Like, you talk about the music, and like you said, it could be literally just about work. And so for me to hear you get to be able to talk about those stories with different people and how they worked in coal mines, it's just It blows my mind to think about that. No one's really asked these kind of questions. Now, I wonder with today's media coverage and all that stuff, if those stories get broadcasted more. And my question to you is, have you found in your time working with the Rivers of Steel National Heritage, when you said you worked all the way to 2008, did you find that their culture has shifted at all in these areas, or is there a lot of work to preserve them? What would you say?
There is work to preserve them. The culture, from what I could tell, did begin to shift because as people, when I started doing this interviewing in this region in the mid 1980s, the whole culture was around steel. Everybody talked about how, like their family had 392 years in the steel mills. If you counted all the uncles, well, like all uncles and brothers and grandparents, and my dad was in there for 58 years, and all that. I've heard those kinds of stories a lot.
Yeah.
Say 18 years later, 15 years later, then you're now not talking to people who lived that life, but you're talking to the children of those people. And for the most part, many of these families that worked in these very construction or industrial situations didn't necessarily want their children to go into the same work as they did.
Yeah.
Doing it because they needed the money, and it was good. They were good jobs. But they would often tell their kids, I don't want you to work in the mines. I don't want you to work in the mills. I want
It's very dangerous.
It's dangerous work. People didn't live terribly to be terribly old. Many times people would get disabled because they would have mill accidents or mine accidents, and stuff happened to people. Yeah. So the culture, I think, has shifted greatly. The economic base of this region has very much shifted to being what they call the joke, or as they call meds and eds, the medical sciences, hospital systems, training doctors and nurses, and educational institutions. So several major colleges and universities are in this region, and big major emphasis on hospitals and medical training, transplant work, all kinds of things. And that's sort of the economic driver for Southwest Pennsylvania. Whereas when we first came here, it was still steel and coal and river work, transporting steel related products and supplies.
Awesome. We worked with the Rivers Steel National Heritage. Now, I know you started your studies as a rabbi, and now you are a rabbi. What is that like?
So the question you asked allows me to tell you that I probably would have stayed with Rivers of Steel for much longer had I not had the desire to go into rabbinical school. And that all came about because I will tell you that when we moved to Pittsburgh, it was the first time in our married life, my husband and I, where we had actually lived with other Jewish people. Because all the other places that we had, remember, I did my field work way long ago with Southeast Alabama in Christian churches. I was often the only Jewish person there. And when we were in Florida, I don't think we ever met another Jewish person because most of the Jewish people in Florida live in southern Florida. And we were living in way northern Florida in Lake City and White Springs, which is right near the Georgia border. And so when we moved up to Pittsburgh, that was a major cultural change for us because I would walk down the street thinking, wow, there are people that look like me here that have the same hand gestures and things. And so we began to get involved in the Jewish community here. And one of the things that happened for me was we joined a synagogue for the first time in our married life. So from that kind of connection, I began to see that I knew a lot about everyone else's cultures, but I knew very little about mine, except what I had experienced growing up. And that wasn't a whole lot. I knew I was Jewish and, but we didn't light candles on Friday nights. I didn't know anything about that. And I had gone to religious school, but there was no such thing as a bat mitzvah, for a girl, or a bar mitzvah for a boy. Well, bar mitzvahs, yes, but not bat mitzvah because it kind of hadn't been invented yet when I was a kid. So as an adult then, here in Pittsburgh, this is when I really began to learn a lot more about my own background. And I fell in love with it. And so I was working along at Rivers of Steel, and at the same time in our private life, we were becoming more and more active in the Jewish world here. And I got to a point where I thought, wow, I'd really like to know more about all of this. And I was enjoying helping lead services, and I was enjoying working with different aspects of Jewish life. And I remember I decided at one point to apply to a rabbinical school. And at first my husband kept referring to it as a fantasy. And I said, well, it may be kind of a dream, but it's not a fantasy. And he said, oh, okay. And he then came all the way around and sort of joined me. But as you probably have gathered, his supporting me in what I wanted to do that was very different from anything that I had done was kind of like the through line of our family life, which is each of us supporting the other at different points along the way.
Yeah.
And so I entered rabbinical school as one of their oldest students ever, and had to learn Hebrew as a person I was 62 when I entered rabbinical school, and it was hard for me to learn that language at this stage of life. Yeah. It's been a really interesting that was in 2007. So I've been ordained since 2013.
Wow.
And in terms of the original question to me was about writing. Mm-hmm. That yes, I have, written various things. I'm again I don't feel that I'm like a great scholar of Jewish texts, but I've written certainly many sort of short sermons and other things that are trying to get across the points that I think are important. Mm-hmm. And I work now as a chaplain at a hospital for Jewish patients and others. And so I use my musical ability, and I use my editing. I use everything. That's why I wanted to tell the folks who might be listening to this, never count yourself out. It's what color is your parachute? How I've sort of recreated myself several different times, but always using the skills that I have. And hopefully in this stage of my life, I'm now 79. Hopefully in these last several years, however long I've got on this planet, to really help. I've always wanted to help people. I've always wanted to help other people be the best they can be. Mm-hmm. It's the richness in people, whether it was interviewing steelworkers, whether it was talking to people in Florida when I first started that kind of work. So there's kind of like a through line that goes through my life to where I am now. And even though it sounds like I've done so many different things, it all feels organic to me, and other people can have that experience too.
Yeah, a few comments on what you were saying there. One, I think your relationship with your husband is absolutely amazing. The fact, like you talk about how you guys support each other, a relationship's never always 50-50. Sometimes you got to give more effort. Sometimes the other person's got to give more effort, but it's all to support one another. And in the end, like, you have a beautiful relationship. The other point I really want to make is I think it's very important when you talk about how you got to experience everything. You talk about how everything's felt organic.
Hmm.
And when I interview different people, that's what I hear about a lot, is that they were exposed to different environments that have kind of pushed them into that area. And it sounds like you've been encapsulated into the music world your entire life.
Hmm.
And so the environment that you kind of set in kind of helps set you up for later. And when I'm interviewing more people, that's kind of the theme I'm getting across, which I think is very cool. And my one question to you
Hmm.
is, how has being a rabbi now, I guess, put an imprint on your life for the future? Like, what are the lessons that you gained from being a rabbi, the teachings that the Jewish faith bestows upon, have translated towards you and to how you carry yourself in the upcoming years, these past years, and so on?
So I guess the thing that stands out to me in your question is, um,
How have you grown and developed?
yeah, how has that how has that worked for me? And I've sometimes wondered what it would have been like had I become a rabbi when most people become a clergy person,
Mhm.
rabbi or minister or priest, whatever, because most people do this kind of training when they're in their late 20s and early 30s.
Yeah.
Most people who are my age and are rabbis have retired, whereas I'm not. At first, I was calling myself a young rabbi in an old body, but what it has meant, I can't consider myself any particular age because I've wound my way, wound my way through so many different sort of iterations of who I am, and they've all been connected in one way or another with each other. But being a rabbi right now feels to me like I'm at the right point in my life to be a rabbi because I have enough previous life experience to bring to it. Because one of the things I remember thinking as I was going through rabbinical school, being like 40 years older than everybody else who were my classmates, was, wow, how is this person going to handle, when someone dies? Or how is this person going to, how can you actually talk about marriage if you're counseling people on before they get married, if you haven't gone through some of this yourself?
Mhm.
And so what I find as being a rabbi now is that I have the experience to bring to bear on different issues that I see, and having the title rabbi and having the training allows me to speak with some authority on things that I would already feel I had authority to speak on, but it gives me a place to speak from. What does Jewish tradition say about this problem? What does Jewish tradition tell us about economic failure in a region? Where do we go from here with our lives?
Yeah.
Those kinds of questions. And so I've done a lot of interfaith work here because I've had all this previous experience of talking to people
Mhm.
across cultural, boundaries and not being afraid of it. And there are many rabbis I know who don't feel comfortable doing that because they haven't had that experience. But my particular case is that I have had, and so I can do that. It's like I see the places that I can do some good in the world and make things better because of who I am and what I've done in the past and hope to do in the future, as well as I can do it and for as long as I can do it.
I think that's absolutely awesome, Doris. I
So,
think you have a beautiful story, and I'm so glad that you are willing to share it with everyone else. So I really do appreciate you being on the episode today.
and I appreciate your willingness to listen to a long and winding story.
It's all
Thanks.
good. Of course, I think it's great to know that people have these windy stories, but there's a common theme of, the environments you get exposed to and the opportunities that you take kind of always help you get to the path you get to. And that's where it kind of brings into the life's ambition thing. And as long as you're willing to seek out these different opportunities and pursue what is out there, then you get to where you want to be. So
Yep.
thank you again, Doris.
Thank you, Drew.